That said, our primary purpose is to entertain, and where we can entertain responsibly, obviously we try to do that. We try to have a positive impact on the world, but the first thing we need to do is entertain.
There was an in-depth piece, like a behind-the-scenes piece, talking about how they've been in a full meltdown about this girl for a couple of years now.
What happens when one of the world's most powerful studios loses control of its own fairy tale? Not just any fairy tale, either. Snow White, the very story that launched Disney's legacy in the first place. You'd think a live-action remake of such a classic would be a guaranteed hit, right? Big budget, a rising star, a beloved villain, a fresh spin. That's the formula. It's worked before. But this time, it didn't just fail, it imploded. In a move that shocked the entire film industry, AMC, the biggest movie theater chain in America, pulled the plug. No slow fade-out, no soft landing, just gone. Theaters emptied out, Showtimes disappeared, and the message couldn't have been louder. This movie was done.
It just takes a beloved movie and makes it much more boring and much less realistic. The movie is really, really bad.
Now, pulling a major Disney release from theaters is rare. Like, really rare. Usually, no matter how bad a movie performs, the brand power alone is enough to keep it limping along until it finds its footing. But Snow White didn't limp. It nosedived. Within days of its release, ticket sales were so low that continuing to screen the film wasn't just unprofitable, it was a liability. And AMC isn't exactly in the business of giving up on Disney titles. Historically, these movies are safe bets. You put them on the big screen, families show up, and the studio machine kicks into gear. But this time, something was seriously wrong. The box office numbers weren't just underwhelming, they were embarrassing. And the buzz surrounding the movie? Completely bad.
So the primary suffering is being sent in by my company to watch a children's movie as a single man, like 2 p.m. on a Thursday. That was the first part that was a little bit weird, but I was basically the only person in the theater.
Disney's live-action remakes have always been a bit controversial. Some fans love the modern twists, others think the originals should be left alone. But this was something else entirely. The backlash was swift, loud, and unrelenting. Every day, a new headline. Every hour, a new meme. Viewers weren't just disinterested, they were furious. So what happened? How did a film with this much weight behind it completely crash and burn? The answer lies in a perfect storm of missteps, starting with one televised moment that turned a bad situation into an unfixable disaster. It all came to a head in a place you wouldn't expect, a daytime talk show. The View, that's where it happened. The moment that would come to be known almost universally online as the meltdown. It wasn't part of the script, it wasn't part of the plan, but once it started, there was no stopping it. Disney had hoped to use The View as a soft-touch platform, something familiar, friendly, mainstream, a place where Rachel Zegler, the film's lead actress, could talk about the magic of the story, share a few light anecdotes, maybe throw in a laugh or two, and move the public's focus back to the film, not the drama. But instead of rescuing the narrative, the interview torched.
Yeah, I have a clip of it.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White.
That laugh.
That is
not going to be saved by
You
the
wrote
prince.
it?
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Right out of the gate, Zegler made it clear she had no interest in reciting pre-written lines. She doubled down on previous comments, saying this version of Snow White wasn't about finding true love or being saved by a prince. It was about leadership, independence, and rewriting a story that, in her words, was no longer relevant. And when she said that, everything changed. To be clear, this wasn't the first time she'd said something bold. Zegler had already stirred controversy online with strong opinions about the original film, calling it outdated, criticizing the prince character, and declaring that her Snow White wouldn't dream about love, but being the leader she knows she can be.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story. With a guy who literally stalks her.
Say it louder so your other eye can hear you.
So we didn't do that this time.
But on The View, those sentiments weren't part of a carefully edited quote or a tweet. They were live, on air, in front of a massive audience. No cuts, no filters. Producers were visibly panicking. According to several reports, there were frantic hand gestures off camera, cue cards being shuffled, stage managers trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Zegler, she wasn't budging. She continued on, even doubling down, and the hosts were clearly scrambling to regain control. Then came the moment no one could ignore. Zegler was abruptly escorted escorted off the set. The show cut to a commercial mid-sentence. Viewers were left confused, social media exploded, and within minutes, the hashtags started flying. Snow White meltdown, #Zegler unscripted, and the far more brutal #Not My Snow White. Clips of the segment went viral. Meme accounts grabbed it, commentators jumped on it, and even major outlets began dissecting the situation.
You don't particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely, when it got announced,
White!
He wasn't a stalker, by the way.
Thing that was like trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry.
For Disney, it was a PR disaster unlike anything they'd faced in years, because it wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Dismissive, defiant, unfiltered. To fans who grew up on the original story, it felt like a rejection of something deeply nostalgic. And to casual moviegoers, it made the whole project feel like a social message disguised as a fairy tale. Overnight, the focus shifted from the film to her.
And so it was like
those people.
Very much this, yes. It was this
people that we
awakening
need to educate, the people that we need to love into awareness.
Direction.
Rachel Zegler wasn't the face of a magical reboot anymore. She was the lightning rod, the face of the fallout. And if Disney thought they could recover from that moment, they were wrong. Because the meltdown wasn't just a misstep, it was the point of no return. Long before the meltdown hit live TV, the storm had already been brewing, and it started with the story itself. When fans first heard Disney was remaking Snow White, the reaction was cautious. Some were excited for a modern take. Others worried the studio would go too far. But when plot leaks and cast interviews started trickling out, that cautious optimism turned into outright concern. Key elements of the original 1937 film, the prince, the romantic arc, the fairy tale tone, were either drastically rewritten or scrapped entirely. The new version wasn't about love. It wasn't about magic. It was about power, about independence, about social commentary. And for many fans, that was a red flag. Now, sure, every remake takes liberties, but this one didn't feel like a retelling. It felt like a rejection.
Very few people wanted to see this. Even the little kids who like Disney movies, even they don't seem to be turning up in droves for the movie because the movie is really, really bad. And so I've got some bona fides here on being fair. The movie was absolutely terrible. In every way that the movie differed from the beloved 1937 original, it was worse. It basically, this movie was like you took the original Snow White and just put everything through this filter of, it wasn't through a filter of Japanese anime, it was through a filter.
Rachel Zegler's version of Snow White wasn't just different, she was almost anti-Snow White. In interviews, Zegler repeatedly distanced herself from the original character, calling the prince a stalker and mocking the idea that Snow White would need to be rescued. And that's where things got messy, because it's one thing to modernize a story, it's another to talk about the original like it's some kind of joke. And that's exactly how a lot of fans interpreted Zegler's tone. Dismissive, sarcastic, like she thought the entire classic was outdated nonsense. The more she spoke, the more it felt like the movie wasn't for the fans at all.
Snow White is generally understood to be a very, very white person. And in this case, they decided, nope, no, that doesn't make any sense. So I don't think we're allowed to say that, right? I was referring to the movie as sand beige.
Disney tried to soften the blow. Promotional material started using words like reimagine and bold new vision. They emphasized diversity, leadership, empowerment. But what they didn't do? Reassure fans that the heart of the story, the reason it lasted for nearly a century, was still there. Instead, the more people learned about the new Snow White, the more they asked, why even call it Snow White at all?
It's no really knock on her. If you did the autobiography of Malcolm X, would you cast Tom Hanks? If you remade Moana, would you cast a little Irish guy? No, you wouldn't. So that was off the top.
The backlash grew fast. Online forums lit up. YouTube reaction channels picked it apart. Even longtime Disney supporters started questioning the direction the studio was taking. Was this really a remake or just a corporate brand slapped onto something unrecognizable? And in the middle of it all, there was Rachel Zegler, not backing down, not walking anything back, proudly saying that the movie wasn't about nostalgia, that it was about change. And maybe that would have worked if the audience had wanted that change. But instead, what they saw was a studio rewriting a beloved story to fit a message, and an actress who seemed more interested in making statements than making magic. And as the backlash built up, all eyes turned to the face of the film, and her fall from grace was just beginning. When Disney first announced Rachel Zegler as the lead for Snow White, it seemed like a smart move. She had star potential. She could sing. She had the look of a modern Disney princess, confident, talented, and media ready. After her breakout in West Side Story, she was considered the next big thing. But here's the thing about Hollywood momentum. It's fragile, and in Zegler's case, it flipped fast. At first, the media portrayed her as a bold, empowered voice, someone who could bring depth and modern relevance to an outdated character. But as the interviews piled up, a different image started to take shape, one that many fans found grating. Over and over, she downplayed the original story, critiqued traditional fairy tale tropes, and openly mocked key aspects of the classic film. It didn't take long before fans stopped seeing her as a fresh take and started seeing her as the symbol of everything wrong with the adaptation.
It is not to suggest that a character who is described in the original as skin white as snow, that is literally how the character is described in the original, that's a character description in the same way that, as you mentioned in Moana, this bizarre fixation with face shifting everything, but only in one direction by Disney, obviously is quite strange.
And then came the social media posts, unfiltered, unapologetic, and often tone deaf. Zegler made it clear she wasn't going to tone it down just to please the press or the public. She stood by her opinions, even as the backlash snowballed. And while that kind of confidence might be admirable in some circles, in this case, it only added fuel to the fire. Worse, rumors began to swirl about tensions behind the scenes, particularly between Zegler and co-star Gal Gadot. Whispers of disagreements over creative views, private criticism, even claims that Zegler resented being compared to her more experienced castmate. None of it was confirmed, but in the court of public opinion, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Gal Gadot, meanwhile, kept her head down. She avoided the drama, stayed vague in interviews, and never took sides. To some, it looked like a professional move. To others, it looked like she was distancing herself from a sinking ship. And then, of course, came The View, the moment that solidified Zegler's downfall. After that, there was no recovering. Her face was on the posters, her name was on the headlines, and her meltdown was on every screen in America. What started as a promising breakout role had turned into a full-blown PR nightmare. From rising star to tabloid target, it happened in a matter of weeks. And as Zegler's public image collapsed, so did the film's chances. But the real shock? Even Disney couldn't save this disaster. And their attempts to clean up the mess only made things worse. When things started going off the rails, Disney did what any billion-dollar company would do. It tried to clean up the mess. But in this case, the cleanup was the mess. What was supposed to be a lighthearted press tour became an all-out PR firestorm, and Disney was caught flat-footed. The plan was simple. Put Rachel Zegler in front of a few friendly cameras, have her share some thoughtful reflections, charm a few daytime hosts, and slowly steer the conversation back to the movie itself. But there was a problem. The message was never consistent. In fact, it was all over the place. One day, she was talking about empowerment. The next, she was trashing the original movie. One Disney executive would say the film was a respectful reimagining. Then a producer would say it was a total reinvention. It didn't take long for fans to realize that no one at the studio seemed to know what this movie actually was. And worse, it didn't seem like anyone was on the same page behind the scenes. Even Disney's famously tight-lipped PR team was struggling. Internal sources revealed that cast members were getting different instructions. Some were told to avoid certain topics, others were pushed to highlight them. Talk show producers, like the team behind The View, were reportedly given detailed talking points, only to have those points completely ignored once the cameras were rolling. Zegler, meanwhile, wasn't making it easy. She wasn't sticking to the script, literally. She posted unapologetically on social media, doubled down on controversial statements, and even mocked some of the backlash. Disney, a company known for controlling every detail down to the exact shade of blue in Cinderella's dress, was now watching its biggest 2025 release turn into an uncontrollable wildfire, one tweet at a time. And when the heat got too intense, the studio pivoted, but not in a way that helped. Suddenly, Rachel Zegler was doing fewer appearances. The marketing campaign pulled back, press access became more limited, and the trailers, they were edited to be less about characters and more about visuals, just flashes of big CGI scenes and vague taglines like "A Tale Reimagined." But by then, it was too late. The public had already made up its mind. This wasn't a beloved retelling. It was a corporate project with an identity crisis. Every time Disney tried to redirect the narrative, something else leaked or exploded online, pulling them right back into controversy. And while Disney scrambled behind closed doors, another giant, AMC Theaters, was watching the fallout closely, and what they did next would send shockwaves across the entire film industry. Because when the biggest theater chain in America gives up on a Disney film, you know it's more than just bad buzz. It's a full-on disaster. AMC's decision came fast and hit harder than anyone expected. In a move that blindsided both fans and insiders, the company announced it would be pulling Snow White from all of its theaters nationwide. And they didn't even try to sugarcoat it. Ticket sales were awful. Audience turnout was dismal, keeping the film on screens was just bad business. Now, let's be clear, this doesn't happen. Not to Disney, not to a live-action remake of one of the most iconic fairy tales in history. Normally, even if a film flops, it hangs around long enough to scrape a few extra dollars. But Snow White was different. This wasn't just a financial failure, it had become radioactive. According to insiders, local AMC managers were reporting empty seats day after day. Some theaters had screenings with 0 attendees. Customers would walk past the posters and openly laugh. Others would ask employees what the movie was about, and when they heard the answer, they moved on to something else. AMC realized something very simple. This movie wasn't just underperforming, it was actively hurting their bottom line. Every showing of Snow White was a missed opportunity to put something, anything, else on screen that people actually wanted to see. So they made the call. And just like that, the biggest cinema chain in the US officially dropped the film. No more listings, no more marquee banners. It vanished almost overnight. And while some speculated there might be tension between AMC and Disney behind the scenes, others believed Disney quietly supported the move. After all, keeping the film in theaters would only drag the embarrassment out further. It was cleaner and quieter to off-screen then continue to fail in public. But it wasn't quiet, not even close. The decision sent shockwaves across Hollywood, because for the first time in a long time, Disney's grip on theatrical dominance had slipped. This wasn't a mid-tier animated feature or a low-budget experiment. This was Snow White, a cornerstone of Disney's legacy, and it had just been yanked off screens like a forgotten B-movie. Joe Rogan called it a watershed moment, not because the movie failed, but because it proved that even Disney isn't bulletproof. If the story's bad, if the buzz is worse, and if your star is melting down on national television, it doesn't matter how big your budget is. The audience will walk away and the theaters, they'll follow. But the damage didn't end in theaters. The ripple effect would spread across the internet, the media, and even Disney's plans for the future. The second AMC made its decision public, the backlash took on a new life. This was no longer just about one actress, or even one movie. It became a cultural lightning rod, a symbol of something much bigger, the growing tension between audiences and the media giants trying to tell them what they should want. Across social media, hashtags exploded. Not my Snow White, not my Disney disaster, house go woke, go broke. Whether you agree with the sentiment or not, it spread like wildfire. Memes flooded Twitter, TikTok, Reddit. Some mocked the empty theaters. Others pasted Rachel Zegler's quotes over crumbling Disney castles. Late-night shows picked it up. Podcast hosts ran with it. YouTubers dissected it frame by frame. And it wasn't just internet noise. The tone had shifted. What started as outrage had become mockery. Even casual moviegoers who didn't follow entertainment news knew about the meltdown. Parents who might have taken their kids to see the movie, now they were steering clear, not because they hated the cast or the messaging or the studio, but because it all just felt uncomfortable, controversial, uninviting. The magic was gone. And in the middle of it, Rachel Zegler became the face of the fiasco. People were no longer debating whether the movie was good or bad. They were debating her. Was she unfairly targeted? Was she too outspoken? Some said she was brave for standing her ground. Others said she tanked the entire project with her attitude. But no matter which side you fell on, one thing was clear. No one was talking about the film anymore. Industry insiders even started using an ugly label, box office destroyer. Harsh? Sure, but perception matters. And once a star is branded with failure, studios get nervous, investors get skittish, projects get delayed, or worse, dropped entirely. And as the dust settled, the most painful part for Disney wasn't just the lost revenue, it was the damage to the brand. Disney, the studio that built its empire on emotional storytelling and timeless characters, had somehow turned Snow White, the original princess, the cornerstone of its legacy, into a cautionary tale. And that tale wasn't just being told in film blogs or box office reports. It was being told by everyone, across the internet, around dinner tables, in classrooms, on podcasts. What was once the safest bet in Hollywood had become the ultimate case study in what not to do. And for the rest of Hollywood, it was a wake-up call. Because if Disney could stumble this hard, anyone could. Snow White's collapse didn't just rattle Disney, it sent a warning shot across the entire industry. Studios everywhere took notes, because this wasn't just a flop, it was a full-on system failure, the kind that forces uncomfortable conversations in boardrooms, the kind that changes strategy meetings overnight. It exposed a truth that's been building for years. Audiences don't want to be lectured, they want to be entertained. Yes, they're open to new ideas. Yes, they'll embrace modern themes. But not at the expense of the story they came to love. Not if it feels like a bait and switch, and not if the people promoting the film seem like they don't even like the source material. Hollywood had gotten used to riding nostalgia, pumping out remake after remake, reboot after reboot, thinking brand recognition alone would carry the box office. But Snow White proved something terrifying for executives. Nostalgia isn't bulletproof. You still have to respect the audience. You still have to deliver the magic. And you definitely can't afford a lead actor who turns the press tour into a minefield. Insiders Insiders say Disney is now rewriting internal policies, tightening PR controls, adding new clauses to actor contracts, and reevaluating every remake currently in development. Streaming strategies are shifting, test screenings are being taken more seriously, and public trust, that's going to take time to rebuild. As for Rachel Zegler, her future's uncertain. Maybe she bounces back, maybe she doubles down. But one thing's for sure, every interview she gives from now on will be under a microscope, and the film, it'll go down in history as more than just a box office bomb. It'll be remembered as the moment when Disney's perfect fairy tale formula cracked, live on national television, because in the end, Snow White wasn't defeated by a wicked witch or a poisoned apple. She was taken down by a studio that forgot the first rule of storytelling: make the audience believe.